the first ones to tell you that, like any endeavor that involves human beings, there are people among them that do things that shouldn't be done. But that doesn't mean you get rid of the police department and replace them with social workers. Because if, God forbid, tonight someone breaks into your home and holds your family at gunpoint, you don't want a grief counselor. You don't want somebody there to sort of talk them through it. You want police officers to show up and save your life and your family's life. And that's what's at stake in this election. Because if we don't control the United States Senate, that is the agenda that's going to be pushed. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if the majority of the Democrats, if you polled them and gave them truth serum, were not in favor of it. Because all the energy in that party, all the money in that party, all the people who get on the cover of magazines in that party are in favor of these radical things.
One Marco Rubio just went absolutely nuclear on the Democrats, calling out AOC and Ilhan Omar for their shameless hypocrisy, and it was devastating. The Florida firebrand completely unloaded on the DNC for relentlessly targeting anyone who dares to reject their radical agenda. You cannot afford to miss this breakdown, so smash that subscribe button right now, and let's get straight into it.
But I want to talk to you about the other reality. And that is that rarely does a state, rarely do a people get the opportunity that you've been handed. And that is to determine in a non-presidential race, the very direction of the country. Now, I want you to know what we run into all across the country. What we run into are people that run for office and they will tell you, I am not a radical. I am going to be a moderate. I am going to be, and that may very well be who they are. Unfortunately, when it comes time to vote, they vote right down the party line. I'm not going to say who it is, but the other day on television, I saw one of these so-called moderate Democratic members of the Senate. And I believe he is. I believe that that's exactly who he is. That's just not how he votes. And so on issue after issue,
the midterm elections are just around the corner, and the cracks are already beginning to show within the Democratic Party. Sensing that the political winds are shifting against them, several vulnerable Democrats are desperately trying to rebrand themselves. They are publicly distancing themselves from the radical left, insisting they aren't the extremists voters think they are. But Marco Rubio is sounding the alarm, and he's not buying this illusion for a single second. Rubio warns that voters must see straight through this carefully crafted campaign strategy. These self-proclaimed moderates might talk a softer game on the campaign trail to win over centrists, but when it truly matters, when critical legislation hits the House floor, they fall right back in line with leadership every single time. Their voting records don't lie. When push comes to shove, partisan loyalty trumps principle, and these hidden leftists consistently side with the exact radical agenda they publicly claim to oppose.
And I have all these people from the national press asking, why did that happen? You know, what happened? What did Republicans do to get the Hispanic vote and so forth? I said, the Democrats that were running are crazy. These are crazy things that they're talking about doing. And normal people don't like crazy things. What do I mean by crazy? This is real crazy. These are crazy things they don't like. They don't think, look, everybody supports the First Amendment. Well, I shouldn't say everybody, but we should all support the First Amendment right to protest. If there's a problem and you don't like it, you have every right in the world to protest. That's a key part of our rights and of our country. You don't have a right to burn down a city. You don't have a right to take over a street.
If you need proof that the modern Democratic Party has completely lost the plot, look no further than their response to recent ICE raids. Across major American cities, federal agents successfully detained and deported thousands of undocumented immigrants with criminal records, an action Rubio correctly framed as the straightforward enforcement of American law. Yet, the Democratic response was absolute chaos. Party operatives and radical activists took to the streets, blockading busy intersections, disrupting local communities, and staging dramatic protests against legitimate law enforcement intervention. Rather than standing with law-abiding American citizens, they chose to stand with those who broke the law to be here. This is precisely the kind of out-of-touch behavior that handed Republicans a decisive victory in the '24 presidential election. And Marco Rubio wants voters to burn that image into their memory. Come midterms, these same politicians will return with polished talking points, and moderate masks firmly in place. Don't let the rebranding fool you. Their actions have already told you everything you need to know.
You know, there is no, we forget a week ago at this time, or maybe 8 days ago at this time, the news was filled with stories of major American cities where these businesses were putting up plywood, which is what we do when a hurricane is on the way, but not when an election is on the way. And I assure you, they weren't putting up that plywood because conservatives were going to be upset at the outcome of an election. These are radical elements. These are radical elements. So these people don't like that. These people don't like police brutality. Our men and women in law enforcement are extraordinary human beings.
That exact pattern of excused chaos is already having real, devastating consequences on the ground. Here is a reality that should stop every voter dead in their tracks. Businesses across the country are already boarding up their storefronts ahead of the midterm elections. Let that sink in. Plywood barricades used to be an unfortunate staple, reserved exclusively for tense presidential election nights, a grim shield against anticipated post-election rioting. But now, merchants and small business owners aren't even waiting for Election Day. They are preparing months in advance. The reason is crystal clear. The Democratic Party has transformed into a radicalized movement that has repeatedly shown a willingness to excuse violent unrest when democratic outcomes don't go their way. When innocent business owners feel compelled to physically protect their livelihoods months before a single ballot is cast, it tells you everything you need to know about the current state of the American left. Marco Rubio has been saying it all along, and now Main Street is proving him 100% right.
They'll be the first ones to tell you that, like any endeavor that involves human beings, there are people among them that do things that shouldn't be done. But that doesn't mean you get rid of the police department and replace them with social workers. Because if, God forbid, tonight someone breaks into your home and holds your family at gunpoint, you don't want a grief counselor. You don't want somebody there to sort of talk them through it. You want police officers to show up and save your life and your family's life. And so they think defunding the police.
Rubio then shifts his focus to one of the most politically toxic positions the Democratic Party has ever embraced: the movement to defund the police. It is not hard to see why this single issue has driven millions of working-class voters straight into the Republican camp. Look, nobody is pretending law enforcement is perfect. There are bad actors within every institution, and holding corrupt or abusive officers accountable is always a conversation worth having. But completely defunding the police? That isn't reform. That is reckless anarchy dressed up as progressivism. Rubio cuts straight through the noise with brutal, undeniable logic. When a criminal is kicking down your front door at 2 o'clock in the morning, you aren't calling a community counselor. You aren't scheduling a conflict resolution session on Zoom. You are dialing 911 and praying someone with a badge and a gun shows up immediately. The radical left's obsession with dismantling law enforcement doesn't just defy common sense. It puts innocent families in genuine danger.
They're upset. You know, some people are really upset about this. They've got kids. I know, forget about people. I personally know people whose kids are in college, okay? And they've got a crazy professor saying outrageous things. And I'm not saying all professors are crazy. I'm saying there's a lot of crazy professors. There are. Believe whatever you want. But these kids are terrified. They're terrified that they're going to fail that course or get a bad grade if they don't agree with the crazy. There are people in America who work in places where they are afraid to put a bumper sticker on their car or wear a hat because they could get fired.
America's universities were once the crown jewel of global intellectual life, sacred spaces where critical thinking flourished. Fierce debates were celebrated, and no idea was too sacred to be challenged. Today, that grand tradition is dead. Classrooms across the country have been hijacked by radical ideologues pushing fringe philosophies that collapse under the slightest logical scrutiny. But here is the truly chilling part. The students already know this, yet they stay completely silent. Why? Because questioning the professor means risking your grade, your reputation, and your entire academic future. And this intolerance doesn't stop at the classroom door. Conservative faculty members operating within these progressive institutions are forced to conceal their political identities, like a shameful secret, fully aware that exposure could instantly cost them their careers. Think about that. In the supposed home of free thought, ideological diversity has become a fireable offense. That is the suffocating culture the establishment has deliberately cultivated, and Marco Rubio is done staying quiet about it.
You think I'm exaggerating? They're making lists. There are people right now making lists of people they want to go after. And members of Congress making lists about people. We're going to go after these people and destroy their lives. This is lunacy. It's lunacy. So yeah, normal people, here's normal people that want to own a home and raise their family in a safe community and retire with dignity and have a country that's safe and stable and give their children a chance at a better life. They're going to vote against people that are crazy and that want to undermine all of that. And that's what's at stake in this election.
Rubio's warning carries immense weight because this playbook of political targeting is not ancient history. It is actively alive today. Rubio argues that if Democrats reclaim congressional power in the midterms, we will immediately see a new round of targeted political warfare. We have already seen exactly what they are capable of. The moment Donald Trump announced his presidential campaign, the full machinery of the Washington establishment was unleashed against him. The endless prosecutions, indictments, and blatant lawfare were weaponized for pure political advantage. It was an unprecedented assault on a political opponent, and the whole world watched it unfold in real time. Perhaps nothing exposes the left's true anxiety more nakedly than Joe Biden's final pardons and sweeping immunity grants for his closest allies before leaving office. That wasn't routine presidential business. That was a silent confession. Biden knew exactly what was coming because he knew exactly what his administration had been doing behind closed doors. Rubio sees it clearly, and voters need to see it too.
Because if we don't control the United States Senate, that is the agenda that's going to be pushed, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if the majority of the Democrats, if you polled them and gave them truth serum, were not in favor of it. Because all the energy in that party, all the money in that party, all the people who get on the cover of magazines in that party are in favor of these radical things.
The Biden years delivered a masterclass in what happens when the radical left is handed the keys to executive power. Open borders that transform local communities overnight. Controversial ideologies pushed on school children too young to critically evaluate them. And a systematic erosion of the moral foundations that have held this nation together for generations. And that was just the baseline. A Kamala Harris presidency would have taken every single one of those extreme policies even further. Thankfully, Middle America wasn't sleeping. Hardworking, common-sense voters from coast to coast looked at that terrifying trajectory, rejected it decisively, and handed Donald Trump a clear mandate to course correct. Now, Marco Rubio is delivering an urgent message directly to those same swing voters ahead of the midterms. The work is not finished. One historic election victory does not permanently secure America's future. The stakes are just as high, the threat is just as real, and your midterm vote matters enormously.
Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet. I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want.
And what makes this warning so incredibly potent is that it isn't just coming from conservatives. Even prominent voices from within the Democratic Party itself are sounding the alarm. Bill Maher, one of the most visible liberal commentators in the country and a lifelong Democrat, has made it abundantly clear that his own party is heading down a dangerous path. This is a man who has stated he will pull the lever for Democrats until his dying breath. Yet even he cannot stomach what the radical wing has become. Maher has been increasingly vocal about the threat that figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Zohran Mamdani, and Bernie Sanders pose to America's economic prosperity and long-term stability. These are no longer fringe outsiders. They are now the loudest, most influential voices actively steering the DNC away from reality. When a die-hard liberal like Bill Maher publicly warns that his party has gone too far, every moderate voter in America should be paying very close attention.
The DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more. You think you're going to win an election on that?
And so, there you have it. Marco Rubio has laid it all out with zero ambiguity. The Democratic Party is simply not the same organization it once was. This is an establishment that protects illegal immigrants over its own citizens, defunds local police departments, weaponizes the justice system against political opponents, poisons universities with radical ideology, and elevates figures so extreme that even their own lifelong supporters are raising red flags. Middle America made the right call in '24, but the battle for the country is far from over. The midterms represent the next critical battleground, and Democrats are already sharpening their messaging and polishing their moderate images to trick you. Don't be deceived by the rebranding. Rubio's message is simple, clear, and urgent. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay vigilant. The future of this country is decided by the people who actually show up to vote. Make sure you are one of them. And on that note, we draw the curtains on today's video. If you found this analysis valuable, then hit that like button